and welcome back to my vlog. We're on to part 8, creative process in the individual, Troward, chapter 4, the manifestation of the life principle, part 1. We must bear in mind that what we have now reached is a principle or universal potential, only we have located it in the individual. But a principle as such is not manifestation. Manifestation is the growth proceeding from the principle, that is to say, some form in which the principle becomes active. At the same time, we must recollect that, though a form is necessary for manifestation, the form is not essential, for the same principle may manifest through various forms, just as electricity may work either through a lamp or a tram car without in any way changing its inherent nature. In this way, we are brought to the conclusion that the life principle must always provide itself with a body in which to function, though it does not follow that this body must always be of the same chemical constitution as the one we now possess. We might well imagine some distant planet where the chemical combinations with which we are familiar on Earth did not obtain, but if the essential life principle of any individual were transported thither, then by the law of the creative process it would proceed to clothe itself with a material body drawn from the atmosphere and substance of that planet. And the personality thus produced would be quite at home there, for all his surroundings would be perfectly natural to him, however different the laws of nature might be there from what we know here. In such a conception as this, we find the importance of the two leading principles to which I have drawn attention. First, the power of the spirit to create ex nihilo, and secondly, the individual's recognition of the basic principle of unity, giving permanence and solidity to the frame of nature. By the former, the self-recognizing life principle could produce any sort of body it chose, and by the latter it would be led to project one in harmony with the natural order of the particular planet, thus making all the facts of that order solid realities to the individual, and himself a solid and natural being to the other inhabitants of that world. But this would not do away with the individual's knowledge of how he got there. And so, supposing him to have realized his identity with the universal life principle sufficiently to consciously control the projection of his own body, he could at will disintegrate the body which accorded with the conditions of one planet and constitute one which accorded just as harmoniously with those of another, and could thus function on any number of planets as a perfectly natural being on each of them. He would in all respects resemble the other inhabitants with one all-important exception, that since he had attained to unity with his creative principle, he would not be tied by the laws of matter as they were. Any one who should attain to such a power could only do so by his realization of the all-embracing unity of the spirit as being the foundation of all things. And this being the basis of his own extended powers, he would be the last to controvert his own basic principle by employing his powers in such a way as to disturb the natural course of evolution in the world where he was. He might use them to help forward the evolution of others in that world, but certainly never to disturb it, for he would always act on the maxim that order is heaven's first law. Our object, however, is not to transfer ourselves to other planets, but to get the best out of this one. But we shall not get the best out of this one until we realize that the power which will enable us to do so is so absolutely universal and fundamental that its application in this world is precisely the same as in any other, and that is why I have stated it as a general proposition applicable to all worlds. The principle being thus universal, there is no reason why we should postpone its application till we find ourselves in another world, and the best place and time to begin are here and now. The starting point is not in time or locality, but in the mode of thought. And if we realize that this point of origination is spirit's power to produce something out of nothing, and that it does this in accordance with the natural order of substance of the particular world in which it is working, then the spiritual ego in ourselves, as proceeding direct from the universal spirit, should be able first to so harmoniously combine the working of spiritual and physical laws in its own body as to keep it in perfect health. Secondly, to carry this process further and renew the body, thus eradicating the effects of old age. And thirdly, to carry the process still further and perpetuate this renewed body as long as the individual might desire. If the student shows this to one of his average acquaintances who has never given any thought to these things, his friend will undoubtedly exclaim, "Tommy rot," even if he does not use a stronger expletive. He will at once appeal to the past experience of all mankind, his argument being that what has not been in the past cannot be in the future. Yet he does not apply the same argument to aeronautics and is quite oblivious of the fact that the sacred volume which he reverences contains promises of these very things. The really earnest student must never forget the maxim that principle is not bound by precedent. If it were, we should still be primitive savages. To use the creative process, we must affirm the creative power. That is to say, we must go back to the beginning of the series and start with pure spirit, only remembering that this starting point is now to be found in ourselves. For this is what distinguishes the individual creative process from the cosmic one. This is where the importance of realizing only one originating power instead of two interacting powers comes in. For it means that we do not derive our power from any existing polarity, but that we are going to establish polarities which will start secondary causation on the lines which we thus determine. This also is where the importance comes in of recognizing that the only possible originating movement of spirit must be self-contemplation. For this shows us that we do not have to contemplate existing conditions, but the divine ideal, and this contemplation of the divine ideal of man is the self-contemplation of the spirit from the standpoint of human individuality. Then the question arises, if these principles are true, why are we not demonstrating them? Well, when our fundamental principle is obviously correct, and yet we do not get the proper results, the only inference is that somewhere or other we have introduced something antagonistic to the fundamental principle, something not inherent in the principle itself, and which therefore owes its presence to some action of our own. Now, the error consists in the belief that the creative power is limited by the material in which it works. If this be assumed, then you have to calculate the resistance offered by the material. And since by the terms of the creative process these resistances do not really exist, you have no basis of calculation at all. In fact, you have no means of knowing where you are, and everything is in confusion. This is why it is so important to remember that the creative process is the action of a single power, and that the interaction of two opposite polarities comes in at a later stage, and is not creative, but only distributive. That is to say, it localizes the energy already proceeding from the single power. This is a fundamental truth which should never be lost sight of. So long, however, as we fail to see this truth, we necessarily limit the creative power by the material it works in. And in practice, we do this by referring to past experience as the only standard of judgment. We are measuring the fifth kingdom by the standard of the fourth, as though we should say that an intellectual man, a being of the fourth kingdom, was to be limited by the conditions which obtain in the first or mineral kingdom. To use scriptural language, we are seeking the living among the dead. And we'll have some more of Chapter 4, the manifestation of the life principle, tomorrow. Make it a great day, and bye for now.